Welcome to Canadian Mystery Archives. Here, we don't soften the truth, and we don't skip the details. We investigate forgotten files, unresolved disappearances, and unexplained incidents from across Canada. Cases quietly shelved, communities that faded from records, and events that left more questions than answers. In this channel, nothing is sensationalized. Every fragment, every silence, and every unanswered detail is examined with the seriousness these cases deserved but never received. If you value cold, atmospheric, investigative documentaries rooted in geography, isolation, and uncertainty, you're in the right place. Subscribe, stay close, and step with us into the files that were never fully closed. Elias Sorensen, 1979, last seen leaving Boreal, Ontario. Hunting camp tracks ended. Elias Sorensen left the hunting camp at approximately 1400 hours on October 12, 1979. The camp log recorded his departure in standard notation. Weather conditions were listed as clear, temperature holding at 6 degrees Celsius. He signed out alone, carrying a bolt-action rifle and a canvas pack containing minimal provisions. Expected return was marked for 1700 hours before full dark. He never returned. The hunting camp itself was located 87 kilometers north of Chapleau, deep within Ontario's Boreal Shield. Access required floatplane or multi-day canoe journey during open water season. By October, the only practical entry was by chartered aircraft landing on one of the interior lakes. The camp operated under a rotating permit system administered through provincial natural resources. Groups booked weeks in advance. Elias Sorensen's party consisted of 6 men, all from southern Ontario, who had reserved the site for 10 days, beginning October 7th. The camp structure was basic but functional. One main cabin with wood stove, sleeping quarters for 8, an adjacent storage shed for equipment and provisions, and an outdoor privy positioned 30 meters downslope toward the lakeshore. The lake itself had no official designation on most maps, identified only by a numerical reference in provincial records. Local usage referred to it as Blackwater Lake, though the name held no administrative standing. Elias was 41 years old at the time of disappearance. He worked as a millwright at a paper facility in Thunder Bay. Married, 2 children. No history of instability or prior incidents suggesting he would abandon responsibilities. His colleagues described him as methodical, cautious in temperament, experienced in wilderness travel. He had participated in similar hunting expeditions for more than 15 years without incident. The detail that troubled investigators from the beginning was found in the camp log itself. Elias had written his intended direction of travel as Northwest Quadrant Ridge approach. That notation suggested he planned to ascend the granite escarpment visible from the camp's western perimeter. The ridge formation rose approximately 140 meters above the lake elevation, densely forested with black spruce and jack pine on lower slopes, transitioning to exposed bedrock and stunted vegetation near the crest. But his actual tracks, when discovered the following morning, led southeast. The discrepancy went unnoticed during the initial hours of his absence. When 1700 hours passed without his return, the camp coordinator initiated standard protocol, firing 3 spaced rifle shots to provide auditory reference. No response came. As daylight faded, concern escalated. The group maintained a fire throughout the night, visible from significant distance across the water. They continued periodic rifle signals until dawn. At first light on October 13th, a systematic search pattern began. 2 men followed the northwestern route Elias had indicated in the log. They reached the ridge base within 40 minutes, finding no trace of passage, no broken vegetation, no boot impressions in the soft ground near the marsh that bordered the approach. Nothing. It was the 3rd man, circling the camp perimeter in widening arcs, who located the actual trail. boot prints clearly defined in a patch of exposed sand near the southeastern shoreline. The prints matched Elias's distinctive tread pattern, confirmed by comparison with impressions left near the cabin entrance. The tracks moved deliberately away from camp, following the uneven terrain parallel to the water's edge, before angling inland toward denser forest. The group followed the trail for approximately 800 meters. The tracks remained visible in scattered areas of exposed soil and moss, each impression clearly defined, showing no signs of erratic movement or haste. Then, without any apparent reason, the tracks ended. They ended in the middle of an unremarkable stretch of boreal forest. No cliff edge, no water feature, no geological disruption. The ground beyond the final print showed no disturbance. The trackers searched in expanding circles from that point, examining every meter of surrounding terrain. They found nothing. The boreal shield landscape of northern Ontario presents a specific set of environmental characteristics that shaped both the initial search and the subsequent investigation. The region experiences dramatic seasonal transitions, with October marking the threshold between autumn conditions and the onset of winter. Average daytime temperatures range between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius, dropping below freezing after sundown. Precipitation patterns are variable, with rain, sleet, and occasional early snow all possible within the same week. The forest composition consists primarily of black spruce and jack pine on higher ground, with tamarack and white cedar dominating the lowland areas surrounding water features. The understory remains sparse in mature stands, but recent fire succession areas create nearly impenetrable thickets of regenerating growth. The region had experienced significant fire activity approximately 12 years prior to 1979, leaving a mosaic of burn patterns across the landscape. Some areas showed mature forest preserved by topography and wind direction, while others remained dominated by dense young growth, barely head height. Ground conditions in October present particular challenges for tracking. The forest floor consists of exposed bedrock in elevated areas, overlaid by thin acidic soils, supporting moss and lichen communities. Lower elevations accumulate organic material in varying depths, creating pockets of boggy ground interspersed with firmer terrain. The moisture content varies significantly based on microclimate, with shaded areas retaining surface water while sun-exposed sections dry rapidly. This creates inconsistent conditions for preserving tracks, with some areas recording clear impressions while adjacent ground shows nothing. Blackwater Lake itself measured approximately 4 kilometers in length, irregular in outline, with numerous small bays and rock promontories. Water depth reached 23 meters in the central basin, according to soundings conducted during the initial provincial survey. The shoreline consisted primarily of exposed bedrock along the northern perimeter, transitioning to marshy conditions along the southern and eastern margins. The hunting camp occupied a rare section of gently sloping terrain on the southwestern shore, one of the few locations suitable for structure placement. The isolation of the site cannot be overstated. The nearest maintained road terminated 61 kilometers to the south. No permanent settlements existed within a 100-kilometer radius. The Canadian National Railway line ran 48 kilometers west, but consisted of single track through uninhabited territory with no scheduled stops in the area. The region supported scattered seasonal camps accessed primarily by aircraft, with floatplane traffic limited to ice-free months and wheeled aircraft requiring suitable lake surfaces for landing. Weather records for the week of Elias's disappearance show relatively stable conditions. October 12th recorded clear skies with light wind from the west. Overnight temperatures dropped to -2 degrees Celsius. October 13th brought increased cloud cover but no precipitation, By October 14th, the first snow began falling, accumulating approximately 4 centimeters before transitioning back to rain. This precipitation sequence proved significant to the investigation as it obscured potential evidence and limited aerial search effectiveness. The hunting camp's operational history extended back 17 years prior to the incident. Provincial records indicated no previous disappearances or serious incidents at the location. The site received regular use during autumn hunting seasons, with occupancy averaging 35 to 40 days per year. Maintenance inspections conducted each spring noted only routine wear, consistent with remote wilderness structures. The camp coordinator for Elias's group had visited the location twice before and reported no unusual characteristics or concerns. Wildlife populations in the region included moose, black bear, wolf, and smaller mammals typical of boreal ecosystems. Moose hunting constituted the primary activity, drawing visitors to the area. Black bears typically entered denning behavior by mid-October, though individual variation meant some animals remained active later. Wolf packs maintained territories encompassing hundreds of square kilometers, with documented presence throughout the district. However, records of wolf attacks on humans in Ontario remained exceptionally rare, with no verified incidents in the region during the relevant time period. The terrain immediately surrounding the point where Elias's tracks terminated showed no distinguishing features that would draw attention or suggest destination. The forest canopy maintained approximately 70% closure, allowing filtered light to reach the ground. Visibility through the understory extended perhaps 15 to 20 meters before tree density obscured sightlines. The ground sloped gently downward toward the southeast, following the broader topographic drainage pattern. No game trails intersected the area. No evidence of previous human passage existed beyond Elias's own tracks. The silence of the boreal forest in October carries particular quality. Most migratory bird species have departed. Insects have entered dormancy. The soundscape consists primarily of wind moving through evergreen canopy and the occasional call of resident corvids. The timeline of Elias Sorensen's movements on October 12, 1979 has been reconstructed from available evidence, though significant gaps remain. His departure from the hunting camp at 1400 hours is firmly established by the camp log entry in his own handwriting. Weather observations, equipment inventory, and intended route were all recorded according to standard protocol. These details were later photographed as part of the official investigation file. The first discrepancy emerged from interviews with the other camp occupants. 2 members of the hunting party were present inside the cabin when Elias departed. Both recalled him mentioning his intention to scout the northwestern ridge, consistent with his written log entry. However, neither man actually observed which direction he walked after leaving the immediate camp clearing. They remained inside preparing the evening meal and did not monitor his departure path. The remaining 3 members of the party were dispersed on their own hunting circuits at the time. One man had left at dawn and did not return to camp until after dark on the 12th, well after Elias's absence had been noted. The other 2 departed mid-morning, traveling together toward the northeastern quadrant. They returned at approximately 16:30 hours before Elias's expected 1700 arrival time, and therefore had not yet registered concern about his whereabouts. The southeastern tracks, discovered on the morning of October 13th, presented investigators with an immediate problem. If Elias had genuinely intended to approach the northwestern ridge, why did he walk in the opposite direction? And why did he record false information in the camp log? One member of the search party suggested the possibility of a last-minute decision change, perhaps triggered by spotting game movement or other opportunity. But this explanation failed to account for the deliberate nature of the southeastern route. The tracks showed consistent spacing and purposeful direction. They did not exhibit the characteristics of pursuit or hurried movement. Elias had walked calmly and steadily away from camp, moving deeper into uninhabited forest, following no obvious landmark or destination. The tracks themselves measured approximately 30 centimeters in length, consistent with Elias's boot size. The tread pattern matched his footwear conclusively. The depth and spacing indicated normal walking gait for an adult male of his height and build, carrying moderate pack weight. No secondary tracks accompanied his trail, no animal prints paralleling his route, no evidence of another person. At approximately 800 meters from the camp, the terrain transitioned from mixed bedrock and organic soil to an area of more uniform forest floor. This section showed scattered patches of exposed mineral soil between moss-covered areas. The tracking conditions remained good. Elias's boot prints appeared clearly in 3 successive patches of bare ground, each print showing full definition. The final clear impression appeared in a small area of sandy soil, possibly deposited during past flood events from the nearby drainage system. The print showed complete detail, every element of the tread pattern preserved. The depth remained consistent with the previous tracks. The orientation indicated continued movement toward the southeast. Beyond that final print, nothing. The search team examined the area with methodical care. They walked in straight lines radiating outward from the last track, spacing themselves at arm's-length intervals to ensure complete ground coverage. They searched in daylight on October 13th until fading light forced suspension, then resumed at first light on October 14th. They covered an area extending 200 meters in all directions from the termination point. They found no tracks, no broken branches at head height, no disturbed moss or lichen, no torn fabric from clothing, no scuff marks on exposed rock, no blood, no rifle, no pack, no equipment of any kind. The forest beyond the last print appeared completely undisturbed, as though no person had ever passed through. Weather conditions during this initial search remained favorable for track detection. The ground retained sufficient moisture to record impressions in receptive surfaces. Wind remained light, insufficient to erase subtle ground sign. Visibility was adequate. The searchers included 2 men with extensive wilderness experience, both familiar with tracking techniques. Their assessment was unanimous. There was no physical evidence of Elias Sorensen's passage beyond the documented tracks. On October 14th, the camp coordinator made the decision to activate official emergency protocols. A member of the party hiked to the nearest point where portable radio communication might be possible, a rock outcrop approximately 6 kilometers north, offering elevation advantage. He succeeded in establishing contact with a forestry tower station, which relayed the message to provincial authorities. A search and rescue response was initiated that same day. The first official search team arrived by float-equipped aircraft on the afternoon of October 14th, just as the weather began deteriorating. Light snow had started falling, with temperature hovering near freezing. The provincial coordinator conducted interviews with all camp members, documented the physical evidence, and organized an expanded search grid. By nightfall, 12 trained personnel were on site, with additional resources scheduled for deployment the following morning. October 15th brought worsening conditions. Snow continued intermittently, accumulating to a depth that obscured ground-level details. The search expanded to cover a radius of 5 kilometers from the camp, divided into systematic grid sections. Teams moved through assigned areas with careful attention to terrain features that might conceal a person, whether injured, sheltering, or deceased. They checked beneath fallen trees, inside natural depressions, around rock formations, along drainage channels. No trace of Elias Sorensen was found. No evidence of shelter construction, no fire remains, no equipment cache, No indication that he had survived the night in the forest. The rifle he carried was never located. The canvas pack containing his provisions never appeared. The official investigation file designated the case as MP 79-1847, opened by the Ontario Provincial Police on October 15, 1979. Lead investigator was Constable Raymond Decker, stationed out of the Wawa detachment, who had previous experience with wilderness disappearance cases in the region. The file classification initially read missing person, presumed lost, though this designation would be revised multiple times over subsequent months. Decker arrived at the hunting camp on October 16th, accompanied by 2 additional investigators and a tracking specialist contracted through Provincial Emergency Services. Weather had temporarily cleared, allowing detailed examination of the physical evidence before further deterioration occurred. The southeastern track line was photographed extensively, with measurements and detailed notes recorded for each identifiable print. The tracking specialist, identified in reports as Gerald Fournier, conducted an independent assessment of the trail. His written report, entered into the investigation file on October 18th, noted several details that would become central to the case. Fournier confirmed that the track showed characteristics consistent with normal walking gait, no indication of injury or impairment. The spacing remained regular throughout the documented trail length. Most significantly, he identified what he described as purposeful navigation, meaning the route appeared to follow some intended destination rather than random wandering. But Fournier's report also contained a notation that troubled investigators. In his professional assessment, the abrupt termination of the tracks was inconsistent with any natural explanation he had encountered in 32 years of wilderness tracking. He stated explicitly that the physical evidence suggested Elias Sorensen had walked to that specific point and then simply stopped existing in any form detectable by standard tracking methodology. Interviews with the hunting party members were conducted systematically. Each man provided a written statement detailing his activities on October 12th, his knowledge of Elias's plans, and his observations during the search efforts. The statement showed minor inconsistencies in timing estimates and distance descriptions, variations considered normal given the stress of the situation and the lack of precise timekeeping in the wilderness environment. But one detail emerged that had not been mentioned during initial interviews. The camp coordinator, Arthur Beamish, recalled a conversation with Elias on the evening of October 11th, the night before his disappearance. Beamish stated that Elias had seemed distracted during the meal, responding to questions with unusual brevity. When asked if everything was satisfactory, Elias had reportedly said, "The forest is different here." Beamish asked what he meant by that statement. Elias did not elaborate, changing the subject to equipment maintenance matters. This conversation fragment was noted in the investigation file, but generated limited follow-up questioning at the time. Decker's interview summary dismissed it as potentially meaningless, a casual observation about unfamiliar terrain. However, the statement would later be cited by various analysts attempting to construct psychological profiles or theoretical explanations for the disappearance. The search operation continued through October 22nd, eventually involving 37 personnel and 2 helicopters equipped with thermal imaging equipment. The aerial survey covered approximately 200 square kilometers of surrounding wilderness, focusing on areas where a lost person might logically travel, seeking help or shelter. The thermal imaging detected several heat signatures, all of which proved to be wildlife upon ground-level investigation. No evidence of human presence was identified beyond the immediate hunting camp area. Ground teams expanded the search radius to encompass all terrain within reasonable walking distance for a person traveling through Boreal forest. Conservative estimates suggested that even an injured individual could cover 10 to 15 kilometers over the course of several days. The search perimeter was therefore extended accordingly, though the vast area and difficult terrain meant coverage remained incomplete in many sectors. One team, working a grid section approximately 4 kilometers southeast of the track termination point, discovered something that briefly generated investigative attention. A section of disturbed ground showed signs of recent excavation, as though something had been buried and subsequently disinterred. The soil had been displaced, then partially replaced, leaving an irregular depression approximately 1 meter in diameter. The surrounding area showed compression patterns consistent with animal activity, likely bear or wolf, investigating the site. Excavation of this location was conducted under controlled conditions, with documentation and evidence collection protocols observed. The dig revealed nothing. The depression extended approximately 40 centimeters below surface level before encountering undisturbed glacial till. No human remains, no equipment, no fabric or other materials were present. The disturbance was ultimately attributed to animal foraging behavior, though the original target of such activity could not be determined. By October 23rd, with winter weather increasingly affecting operational capability and no new evidence emerging, the active search was suspended. The file remained open and designated as priority for any new information, but ongoing systematic searching was deemed no longer viable. The decision was communicated to Elias's family, who had maintained contact with investigators throughout the operation. Elias's wife, Margaret Sorensen, traveled to Thunder Bay to meet with investigators on October 26th. Her interview, conducted by Constable Decker with a victim services coordinator present, provided additional background information. She confirmed that Elias had shown no signs of depression, financial trouble, marital problems, or other factors that might suggest voluntary disappearance. His behavior before departure for the hunting trip had been entirely normal. He had spoken with her by radio telephone on October 10th, 2 days before his disappearance, and the conversation had been unremarkable. Margaret did mention one detail that was entered into the investigation notes. Elias had returned from a previous hunting trip to the same general region 2 years earlier, in 1977, and had mentioned experiencing unusual disorientation on one occasion. He had described momentarily losing all sense of direction while walking through forest that appeared identical in all directions. The episode lasted perhaps 30 seconds before his navigational certainty returned. He had laughed about it at the time, attributing it to fatigue. Margaret stated she had not thought about this incident until being asked whether Elias had ever mentioned anything unusual about the area. Follow-up investigation attempted to locate other individuals who had used the Blackwater Lake hunting camp in previous years. Provincial records provided names and contact information for 7 other registered parties. 6 groups were successfully contacted. None reported unusual incidents or observations. All described the location as typical of the region, offering good hunting access with standard boreal wilderness characteristics. The 7th group could not be located. Their registration, from October 1975, listed a contact address in Sudbury that proved to be a vacant lot by 1979. The registered name, Thomas Millbrook, did not appear in any accessible databases. This dead end was noted in the file, but not considered significant given the camp registrations often contained incomplete or outdated information. Forensic examination of the camp log entry made by Elias showed no evidence of alterations or unusual pressure patterns that might suggest the text was written under duress. Handwriting analysis confirmed the entry was consistent with other known samples of Elias's writing. The stated route to the northwestern ridge appeared to be a straightforward false statement, but the reason for the deception remained unknown. The investigation file accumulated additional material over subsequent months as tips and reported sightings were received and followed up. A trapper working territory 80 kilometers northeast reported seeing smoke rising from an unexpected location in late October, but search of that area found only the remains of an old lightning strike fire from the previous summer. A resident of Chapleau called in to report a man matching Elias's description purchasing supplies in early November, but review of available photographic evidence and timeline analysis ruled out the connection. By April 1980, the investigation had effectively stalled. No physical evidence beyond the tracks had been recovered. No witness information provided viable leads. The file remained officially open but moved to inactive status, reviewed periodically but generating no new investigative activity. Constable Decker's final summary report, dated April 18, 1980, concluded with a statement that would be quoted in subsequent reviews. All available evidence has been examined. The absence of explanation did not prevent the development of various theories, both official and unofficial, attempting to account for what happened to Elias Sorensen. These theories ranged from conventional wilderness accidents to more speculative possibilities, each confronting the same fundamental problem. The physical evidence did not support any of them conclusively. The most straightforward explanation proposed that Elias suffered some form of medical emergency. A cardiac event, stroke, or other sudden incapacitation could have caused him to collapse beyond the point where his last tracks were visible. However, this theory struggled to explain why systematic search of the surrounding area failed to locate his body. Even if he had walked some distance after the final print before collapsing, the search radius extended well beyond any reasonable estimate of such movement. Additionally, the theory did not address why his tracks terminated so abruptly, with no evidence of stumbling or erratic movement that might precede a medical collapse. Wildlife predation was considered, particularly given the presence of black bears and wolves in the region. A sudden encounter with a bear protecting cubs or a carcass might theoretically result in an attack that displaced the body from the immediate area. However, bear attacks generally leave significant evidence: blood, torn vegetation, disturbed ground, and typically some scatter of equipment or clothing. None of these indicators were present. Wolf predation of a healthy adult human is considered extremely rare and would similarly be expected to leave detectable sign. The tracking specialist specifically looked for and found no animal prints or scat in proximity to the track termination point. Accidental fall into a concealed void was examined as a possibility. The Boreal shield contains fissures, small caves, and other geological features that might theoretically trap a person. However, geological survey maps of the area showed no significant karst formations or other void-creating structures. The bedrock in the region consists primarily of igneous granite and metamorphic gneiss, not the limestone or other soluble rock types that produce cave systems. Ground-penetrating radar was not employed during the 1979 search, but later reviews of geological data found no plausible void features in the relevant area. The theory of voluntary disappearance faced numerous obstacles. Elias had no apparent motive to abandon his life. Financial records showed no unusual transactions or debt. Personal relationships appeared stable. He had no known history of mental health issues or prior disappearances. A hunting trip involved family friends. If he planned to vanish, this was an unlikely context. Moreover, voluntary disappearance does not explain the physical evidence, the false log entry, the southeastern tracks, the abrupt termination. A person choosing to disappear would more likely create a plausible scenario of drowning or other untraceable accident, not a trail that stopped impossibly in the middle of forest. Some speculation centered on the possibility of foul play. Could another person have been involved? Could Elias have been killed and his body removed or concealed? This theory required explaining how such an act could be accomplished without leaving any trace in the tracking favorable ground conditions. It also required identifying a perpetrator and motive. No evidence of conflict existed among the hunting party. No financial or personal relationships suggested a reason for harm. And the logistics of removing a body from the location without leaving tracks or other sign proved difficult to reconcile with the physical evidence. Disorientation and hypothermia was proposed as a combined explanation. If Elias became confused about his location, he might have wandered beyond the search area before succumbing to exposure. October temperatures, particularly overnight, could be lethal to someone without shelter. However, the tracks showed no characteristics of disorientation. They moved with consistent purpose, and search efforts had covered terrain well beyond distances typical for even severely disoriented individuals. The lack of any equipment finds, no dropped pack, no abandoned rifle, also undermined this explanation. A less conventional theory emerged from examination of the regional topology and historical records. The area surrounding Blackwater Lake had experienced significant forest fire activity in previous decades, creating complex patterns of regeneration and deadfall timber. Some researchers suggested the possibility of Elias falling into a concealed cellar hole or pit created by a burned-out stump, subsequently covered by natural debris accumulation. However, no record of structures or settlement existed for that location, making such features unlikely. Additionally, the search protocol specifically included probing suspect ground features and checking beneath debris accumulations. The false log entry remained a persistent puzzle that no theory adequately addressed. Why would Elias write that he intended to go northwest, then immediately walk southeast? Some analysts suggested simple error, perhaps caused by confusion about cardinal directions. But Elias was an experienced outdoorsman who had demonstrated navigational competence in previous wilderness travel. Others suggested the false entry might have been deliberate, intended to delay discovery of his actual route for reasons unknown. This explanation introduced elements of premeditation inconsistent with other aspects of the case. One detail noted by multiple reviewers was the specific location where the tracks ended. Measurement from camp coordinates placed the termination point at almost exactly 800 meters distance. The precision of this number, not 790 meters or 820 meters, but 800 meters within measurement tolerance, struck some observers as potentially significant, though no explanation for such significance was offered. Others dismissed this as meaningless, noting that humans tend to identify patterns in random data. Magnetic anomalies were investigated after an amateur researcher noted that the regional geology included deposits of magnetite and other iron-bearing minerals that might affect compass function. The theory suggested that Elias might have become disoriented due to compass malfunction and wandered into terrain not covered by search efforts. However, investigation of the specific site found no unusual magnetic readings, and Elias was known to navigate primarily by terrain features and sun position rather than heavy reliance on compass bearings. The comment Elias made to Arthur Beamish, "The forest is different here," generated its own category of speculation. What had he meant? Different in what way? Some interpreted this as evidence of psychological distress or altered perception. Others suggested he might have noticed some physical characteristic of the environment that proved relevant to his disappearance. Still others dismissed the statement as casual conversation with no deeper meaning. The ambiguity prevented any definitive interpretation. 45 years after the incident, no consensus explanation has emerged. The Blackwater Lake hunting camp continued operation for 7 years after Elias Sorensen's disappearance. Provincial records show regular seasonal use through 1986 with no reported incidents or unusual occurrences. In 1987, the permit was not renewed and the site was decommissioned. The main cabin structure remained standing but unmaintained, gradually deteriorating through natural weathering and occasional damage from falling trees during wind events. By 1995, aerial surveys showed the cabin had collapsed. The site reverted fully to wilderness, with no markers or structures indicating its previous function. The numerical lake designation remains in provincial databases, but usage of the name Blackwater Lake has effectively disappeared from current maps and reference materials. The location exists now primarily as geographic coordinates and a footnote in unsolved case files. Margaret Sorensen maintained communication with investigators for several years following her husband's disappearance. She participated in media appeals, hoping that publicity might generate new information. In 1983, she arranged for a private search team to revisit the area, funded through family resources. The team spent 4 days examining terrain beyond the original search perimeter, using updated equipment and methodology. They found nothing. Elias Sorensen was declared legally dead in 1986, 7 years after his disappearance, following standard legal procedures. Margaret Sorensen died in 2003, never having received answers about what happened that October afternoon. Their 2 children, who were 12 and 14 years old at the time their father vanished, declined to participate in subsequent media coverage or investigation reviews. The case gradually faded from public attention, remembered primarily by specialized researchers focusing on wilderness disappearances. The investigation file contains 1,247 pages of documentation, interview transcripts, search reports, topographic maps with grid overlays, photographs of the track line, equipment inventories, weather data, geological surveys, and various analytical reports comprise the accumulated material. Digital scanning of the file was completed in 2007 as part of a provincial archive modernization project. The physical file remains stored in a climate-controlled facility in Thunder Bay, accessible to authorized investigators but rarely requested. 3 specific items from the file have been cited repeatedly in subsequent analyses. The photograph of the final boot print, showing every detail of the tread pattern pressed into sandy soil with no continuation beyond. The tracking specialist's statement that the termination was inconsistent with any natural explanation he had encountered, and the camp log entry in Elias Sorensen's handwriting stating his intention to travel northwest when all physical evidence shows he walked southeast. These 3 elements define the core mystery. A man walked into the forest following no obvious landmark, left a false record of his intended route, and then ceased to exist at a point where the ground should have continued recording his passage, but did not. The Boreal wilderness of northern Ontario holds no obligation to explain itself. The forest continues, indifferent to human confusion, sheltering whatever happened in October 1979 beneath black spruce canopy and silence. No similar incident has been reported from the Blackwater Lake area since Elias Sorensen's disappearance. The region remains remote, rarely visited, accessible only with significant effort. The tracks that ended 800 meters from camp have long since been erased by annual cycles of snow and thaw, new growth and decay. The exact location exists now only as coordinates in archived reports, indistinguishable from the surrounding thousands of hectares of identical forest.